I never wanted to be the center of neighborhood drama. My wife Jessica and I had just wanted a quiet suburban life away from the city. The two-story colonial on Maple Street seemed perfect: spacious yard, good school district, and what the realtor promised was a reasonable HOA. We should have asked more questions about that last part. The first few weeks were blissful. We painted the interior, added some modern fixtures, and dreamed about what we could do with the backyard. It was large, flat, and perfect for summer entertaining. Jessica had always wanted a pool, and after researching costs, we settled on a modest above-ground option that would give us the enjoyment without breaking the bank or requiring extensive permitting. I did my homework meticulously. The HOA handbook was thick, but I read every page twice. Section 4.3 clearly stated that above-ground pools under a certain height and square footage were permitted without special approval, provided they were maintained and properly fenced. Our pool plans fit well within those parameters. I even took photographs of the measurements and kept copies of all documents. The installation went smoothly. By mid-June, we had a beautiful 15-foot round pool with a small deck attached, all properly fenced as required. The whole setup was tasteful and unobtrusive. We were excited to host our first neighborhood barbecue to meet everyone properly. That was when I first met Karen Mitchell. She arrived at our door with a lemon cake and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Her platinum blonde hair was cut in the classic "I want to speak to the manager" style, and she wore white capri pants with a pastel pink polo shirt. "Welcome to Maple Street Estates," she said, her voice high and practiced. "I am Karen Mitchell. I live in the blue colonial 2 doors down. I am also the vice president of the HOA, and well, I like to think of myself as the eyes and ears of the community." I invited her in politely, and Jessica offered her some iced tea. She declined, but insisted on a quick tour of the house. The way she examined everything, making little notes in her phone, made me uneasy. When we reached the backyard door and she spotted the pool, she froze. "Oh my, that is quite a structure," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "I assume you have all the proper approvals." I explained that according to the HOA guidelines, our pool fell within the allowable parameters without special approval. I even offered to show her the handbook section. "Well," she said with a tight smile, "I know the rules better than anyone. I have been on the board for 11 years. There may be interpretations you are not aware of as newcomers." She left shortly after, but not before adding, "I will be checking on those pool specifications. We take rule compliance very seriously in this neighborhood." As the weeks passed, I noticed Karen's presence more and more. She would walk by our house multiple times a day, slowing down to peer through the fence slats. Sometimes she would stand on her tiptoes at the property line, taking photos with her phone. Once, I caught her using what looked like a measuring tape extended over our fence. One Saturday afternoon, while Jessica and I were enjoying the pool, the gate to our backyard suddenly opened. Karen walked in uninvited, clipboard in hand. "I need to verify some measurements," she announced without so much as a hello. "The board has concerns about potential violations." I climbed out of the pool, dripping wet and increasingly annoyed. "Karen, this is private property. You cannot just walk into our backyard without permission." "As an HOA officer, I have the right to inspect potential violations," she countered, already marching toward the pool. "Actually, you do not without prior notice and permission," I said firmly. "Please leave now, or I will have to call the police for trespassing." Her face flushed red. "You clearly do not understand how things work here. This is not over." She turned on her heel and stormed out. That night, Jessica and I discussed what had happened. "Maybe we should just try to make peace with her," Jessica suggested. "She seems to have a lot of influence here." I nodded, but something in my gut told me this was just the beginning. Karen had not just come to welcome us or enforce rules. She had come to establish dominance, and for some reason, our modest pool had become the battlefield. The first official letter arrived exactly 3 days after Karen's backyard intrusion. The envelope bore the official Maple Street Estates HOA logo, and inside was a formal notice of violation. I read it twice, my blood pressure rising with each paragraph. This notice serves to inform you that your property at 1428 Maple Street is in violation of HOA Covenant Section 7.2 regarding unauthorized water features and Section 9.5 regarding structural additions without board approval. I immediately pulled out the HOA handbook. There was no Section 7.2 about unauthorized water features. The closest was Section 7.12 about proper drainage. Section 9.5 referred to permanent structures attached to the house, not freestanding, temporary installations like our pool. The letter continued, "You are hereby required to remove the non-compliant swimming pool within 14 days or face daily fines of $100. I called the HOA president immediately, a man named Richard Henderson. He seemed confused about the specifics but kept referring to concerns brought by the compliance committee. "There will be a board meeting next Tuesday," he said. "You can present your case then." I spent the next week preparing. I made copies of the relevant HOA sections, took photographs with measurements clearly visible, and even prepared a presentation on my laptop. Jessica thought I was overreacting, but something told me this was not going to be a rational discussion. The Maple Street Estates HOA met in the community center, a small building next to the neighborhood playground. When I arrived, there were about 20 residents scattered throughout the room. At the front sat 7 board members behind a long table, Karen prominently positioned near the center. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium confidently. "Good evening, I am here to address the violation notice regarding my pool. I have brought evidence showing that our installation fully complies with all HOA regulations." I had barely started my presentation when Karen cleared her throat loudly. "Mr. Henderson, if I may," she interrupted, "we have already reviewed this matter extensively in committee. The violation is clear." "But there is no Section 7.2 as cited in the letter," I responded, "and Section 9.5 does not apply to above-ground pools." Karen smiled thinly. "Perhaps you have an outdated copy of the guidelines. The board approved amendments last year." This was news to me. "May I see these amendments?" "They are available in the members' portal," Richard said vaguely. "I checked the portal yesterday. There are no such amendments posted," I replied. The meeting devolved from there. Every point I made was interrupted, dismissed, or ignored. When I tried to show my documentation, Karen would speak over me about neighborhood aesthetics and property values. When other residents attempted to ask questions, they were told this matter concerns specific violations, not general discussion. After an hour of this frustrating back and forth, Richard called for a vote. To my dismay, the board voted 5-2 to uphold the violation notice. Only an elderly gentleman named Frank and a younger woman named Michelle voted in my favor. As people filed out after the meeting, Frank approached me quietly. "You are not the first," he whispered. "Karen has been doing this for years. Last summer, the Thompsons had to tear out their vegetable garden. Before that, the Wilsons were forced to repaint their house because the shade of blue was non-conforming, even though it matched the approved color chart." Over the next month, the situation escalated dramatically. We received new violation notices weekly. Improper landscaping around water feature. Excessive noise from pool equipment. Unauthorized gathering of more than 6 people in backyard. Each complaint was more ridiculous than the last, and each one had Karen's fingerprints all over it. When we installed a privacy screen to block her constant surveillance, we received a notice for unapproved fencing materials. I attempted to reason with Karen directly once more, catching her as she walked her small poodle past our house. "Karen, could we please talk about these notices? There has to be a way to resolve this amicably." She adjusted her designer sunglasses and looked at me as if I were something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. "There is a simple resolution. Remove the eyesore from your backyard and come into compliance." "The pool complies with all written regulations," I insisted. "I have verified this with county zoning as well." "Are you calling me a liar?" she snapped, her voice rising. This conversation is starting to feel like harassment. I will have to report this to the board and possibly the authorities. That evening, checking our newly installed security cameras, I watched in disbelief as Karen walked the perimeter of our property, taking measurements and photographs. She stopped to chat with other neighbors, pointing repeatedly at our house. From her gestures and their expressions, it was clear she was rallying opposition. Jessica was becoming stressed by the constant conflict. "Maybe we should just take down the pool," she suggested one night. "It is not worth all this trouble." I looked at my wife's worried face and felt a surge of determination. "No," I said firmly, "this is not really about the pool. If we give in now, she will just find something else to target. This is about someone abusing their power, and it needs to stop." What Karen did not know was that I had already begun my counteroffensive, and I was playing for keeps. They say knowledge is power. If that is true, I needed to become the most powerful person in Maple Street Estates. I started by educating myself on everything related to HOAs, their legal boundaries, enforcement limitations, and most importantly, what constituted abuse of authority. I discovered that in our state, HOAs must follow strict procedural rules. All amendments must be properly recorded with the county and distributed to all homeowners. Inspections required 48-hour written notice. Most importantly, board members could be held personally liable for harassment or selective enforcement. Armed with this knowledge, I began building my case methodically. I created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every interaction, every notice, every trespass. I installed additional security cameras covering every angle of our property. I set up motion alerts on my phone that notified me whenever someone approached our fence line. While gathering evidence against Karen, I also started quietly connecting with other neighbors. I would casually mention the pool situation during dog walks or mail collection. The reactions were telling: nervous glances, sympathetic whispers, and often stories of their own. "She made the Gonzalez family tear out their children's treehouse last spring," confided Mrs. Peterson, an elderly resident who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. "It was fully in their backyard, harmed no one, but Karen claimed it violated some height restriction." "We wanted to paint our door red," said Michael from across the street. "She personally came over with the approved color chart and told us we could only choose rustic brown or forest green because anything else would lower the tone of the street." Pattern after pattern emerged. Karen targeted new families first, establishing dominance. She focused on visible violations to set examples. She weaponized procedural knowledge against those who did not have time to read the fine print. I compiled these stories alongside my own documentation. Then I took the offensive. First, I sent a certified letter to the HOA board, copying every homeowner in the development. The letter formally challenged the validity of the violation notices, cited specific bylaws that Karen had violated by entering my property without permission, and requested all board meeting minutes from the past year where these supposed amendments had been discussed. Second, I filed a report with the county zoning office requesting verification that my pool installation complied with all local ordinances. They responded promptly, confirming what I already knew: the pool was fully compliant with county regulations. Third, I sent a cease and desist letter to Karen personally, citing her repeated trespassing, false claims, and harassment. I included screenshots from my security footage showing her measuring my yard, peering through windows, and entering my property without permission. The response was immediate and predictable. Karen escalated her campaign. A new notice arrived claiming that water from our pool was somehow seeping into adjacent properties and causing damage, a physical impossibility given the location and construction of the pool. Then came the most brazen move yet. While Jessica and I were at work, a man in an unmarked van parked in front of our house. Our security camera caught him wearing a vest with "Inspector" handwritten on the back, attempting to access our backyard. When our next-door neighbor questioned him, he claimed to be from County Water Management but could produce no identification and quickly departed. That same evening, the camera caught Karen herself. At precisely 9:47 p.m., she slipped through our side gate, flashlight in hand. She circled the pool, taking photographs and what appeared to be water samples. She spent 14 minutes on our property before departing, completely unaware that every movement was being recorded in high definition. The footage was damning. Not only was she trespassing, but she was doing so at night, clearly aware that what she was doing was wrong. I saved multiple copies of the video and sent one to my attorney. "This is exactly what we need," my lawyer said over the phone. "Clear evidence of harassment and trespassing. Combined with the procedural violations in the HOA notices, we have a strong case for both restraining orders and removal from the board." That night, I sat on our patio looking at the pool that had become such a source of conflict. The water reflected the moonlight peacefully, contrasting with the turmoil surrounding it. Jessica joined me, placing her hand on my shoulder. "How far are you planning to take this?" she asked quietly. I showed her the footage of Karen sneaking around our property in the darkness. "All the way," I replied. "This stopped being about a pool a long time ago. It is about someone who thinks rules apply to everyone but her, someone who has terrorized this neighborhood for years because no one stood up to her." Jessica nodded slowly, then let us finish it. The next day, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. Karen thought she was fighting a battle over a pool. She had no idea she was about to lose her entire kingdom. Monday morning, I walked into the police station with a thick folder under my arm and determination in my step. The desk sergeant looked up as I approached. "I would like to file a harassment report," I said calmly. "I have video evidence of trespassing, documentation of persistent threatening behavior, and witness statements." Officer Rodriguez took my statement methodically, his expression growing increasingly concerned as I presented the evidence chronologically. The night footage of Karen prowling around our yard particularly caught his attention. "Sir, how long has this been going on?" he asked. "Almost 3 months now," I replied. "It began as HOA disputes but has escalated to this." He nodded gravely. "We will send an officer to speak with Ms. Mitchell about the trespassing. In the meantime, I recommend you continue documenting everything." That same afternoon, my attorney delivered formal legal notices to each HOA board member. The documents detailed Karen's actions, the questionable violation notices, and the board's failure to follow their own procedures. It outlined potential personal liability for each member if they continued to participate in what could be construed as coordinated harassment. The legal notice concluded with a demand: hold an emergency community meeting within 7 days to address these issues, or face a lawsuit nomming both the HOA and individual board members. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. While waiting for the meeting, I did not sit idle. I reached out to every neighbor who had shared stories about Karen. Many were initially reluctant to speak publicly, but when I showed them the growing support and the legal protection we now had, several agreed to testify about their experiences. Thursday evening arrived. The community center was packed. Nearly every household had sent at least one representative. The tension in the room was palpable as Richard called the meeting to order. Karen sat rigidly at the board table, her usual confidence noticeably diminished. I had requested to speak first, and Richard reluctantly agreed. "Neighbors," I began, connecting my laptop to the projector, "I am here tonight not just to defend my property but to address a pattern of abuse that has affected many of us." The room fell silent as I methodically presented my case. I showed timeline after timeline of escalating harassment. I played select clips from the security footage, including Karen's nighttime invasion of our property. I displayed the contradictory HOA notices alongside the actual bylaw text, highlighting the discrepancies. "But this is not just about my family," I continued. "This is about our community." I invited others to speak. One by one, neighbors rose. Mrs. Peterson described how Karen had threatened to fine her for having her grandchildren visit too often. The Gonzalez family detailed the treehouse incident. Michael recounted the door color restriction. Each story built upon the last, painting a clear picture of years of tyrannical control. Frank, the elderly board member who had voted in my favor, spoke last. "I have served on this board for 9 years, he said, his voice steady despite his age. In that time, I have watched as our community guidelines transformed from reasonable protections into weapons. I have objected repeatedly in closed sessions but have been overruled. I can no longer remain silent. Throughout these testimonies, Karen's face cycled through emotions: dismissiveness, anger, disbelief, and finally, as the weight of public opinion turned decisively against her, panic. When it was her turn to respond, she stood shakily. "These accusations are outrageous," she began, her voice higher than usual. "Everything I have done has been for the good of this community and its property values. Without proper enforcement, this neighborhood would descend into chaos." She pointed at me accusingly. "This new resident refuses to comply with established standards and is now trying to undermine the entire structure of our community." From the back of the room, a child's voice piped up, "My mom says you're a bully." The room fell silent. It was Lily, the 8-year-old daughter of the Thompsons, whose garden had been destroyed. Karen's face contorted with rage. "Control your brat," she shrieked at Mrs. Thompson. "This is exactly what happens when rules are not enforced. Children with no respect, chaos everywhere." The outburst stunned everyone. Several people were recording with their phones. Karen seemed to suddenly realize what she had done and attempted to compose herself, but the damage was complete. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I think we should take a brief recess." During the break, board members huddled in corners, speaking in urgent whispers. When the meeting reconvened, Richard announced that the board would immediately open an investigation into all claims and temporarily suspend Karen from her duties pending the results. As we left the community center, my neighbor Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "Someone from the local paper was here," he said. "Apparently they have been looking into HOA overreach stories. This might make the weekend edition." Indeed, 3 days later, the Westland County Chronicle ran a small but pointed piece titled "HOA Tyranny: When Neighbors Become Dictators." It did not name Karen directly, but detailed the situation at Maple Street Estates with enough specificity that everyone knew exactly who was involved. The article quoted legal experts discussing the limitations of HOA authority and the growing pushback against excessive enforcement nationwide. It was balanced and factual, which made it all the more damning. For the first time since moving in, I walked around the neighborhood and received smiles, waves, and thumbs up from people who had previously been too intimidated to interact. The atmosphere had changed palpably. A small rebellion had succeeded, and everyone could feel it. But Karen was not finished. Her public humiliation had only fueled her determination for revenge, and I was already preparing for her next move. The investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, Karen was officially suspended from the HOA board pending a formal vote for removal. The temporary board, now led by Frank and supplemented by 2 volunteers, began reviewing all outstanding violation notices and found dozens of questionable cases, not just against me but throughout the neighborhood. Karen did not take her suspension gracefully. Unable to use official channels, she resorted to pettier tactics. Anonymous notes appeared in our mailbox: "Property values dropping because of you, and some neighbors ruin everything." Our trash cans were mysteriously knocked over. Car alarms would go off at 3 a.m. near our bedroom window. None of it could be definitively traced back to her, though our cameras occasionally caught glimpses of a figure that matched her build hurrying away from the scenes. The breaking point came when Jessica found our garden hose cut in multiple places one morning. That same day, we received a call from the HOA's insurance company inquiring about water damage claims against neighboring properties. "She is trying to manufacture evidence for her original complaint," my attorney explained. "She likely reported water damage herself." That evening, Jessica and I sat on our patio, looking at the pool that had started everything. "I am tired of being on the defensive," I said finally. "It is time to change strategies." "What are you thinking?" Jessica asked, eyeing me carefully. "Something completely unexpected. Something that follows every rule to the letter while still driving her absolutely crazy." The next morning, I requested a copy of the complete HOA bylaws, county ordinances, and local zoning regulations. I spent the entire weekend studying them, making notes, and developing a plan that was audacious, perfectly legal, and guaranteed to push Karen over the edge. Step 1 was the pool. I hired a company to drain it properly. Once empty, instead of disassembling it, we filled it with rich, dark topsoil. The conversion from swimming pool to garden pond mud pit took just 2 days. Step 2 involved a visit to a local farm. After extensive research into local ordinances, I discovered our property was zoned to allow a small number of livestock for educational or hobby purposes with proper permitting. By the end of the week, I had acquired 2 miniature goats, a pot-bellied pig, and 4 chickens, along with all necessary permits and proper housing structures. Step 3 was aesthetic. I installed solar-powered garden lights around the converted pool area, added charming hand-painted signs identifying our urban microfarm initiative, and built a small seating area where the pool deck had been. The transformation was complete just as the weekend arrived. Early Saturday morning, I was outside feeding the animals when Karen emerged from her house and froze in her tracks. The look of shock on her face as she took in the scene, the mud pit, the happily grunting pig, the goats bleating enthusiastically, was worth every penny we had spent. She marched directly to our fence line. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice reaching a pitch that startled the chickens. "Good morning, Karen," I replied pleasantly. "Just embracing sustainable living. Everything is fully permitted and compliant with all regulations. This is, farm animals do not belong in a residential neighborhood." I smiled and held up a folder. Actually, Section 12.3 of the county ordinance specifically allows for small educational livestock installations under 10 animals. I have all the paperwork right here if you would like to review it. Her face contorted with fury. "This mud pit will attract mosquitoes and vermin." "It is a natural garden pond with proper drainage and ecological controls," I corrected her, "fully compliant with Section 8.4 of the HOA bylaws regarding water features." As if on cue, one of the goats wandered over and bleated loudly at Karen. She stumbled backward, clutching her designer handbag to her chest as if the animal might leap the fence and devour it. "This is not over," she hissed before storming back to her house. True to her word, within hours, animal control officers arrived at our door. I greeted them warmly and presented my meticulously organized permits. They inspected the animals, their housing, and our setup. Everything was in order. Honestly, one officer confided as they were leaving, "This is one of the cleanest, most well-maintained small livestock setups I have seen. Whatever complaint was called and seems unfounded." The next day brought an even more surprising development. Neighborhood children began appearing at our fence, fascinated by the animals. Parents followed, curious about what was happening. "This is amazing," said Mrs. Thompson, watching her daughter Lily giggle as the pigs snuffled around for treats. "Lily has been begging to visit a farm. Having this right in the neighborhood is wonderful." Other neighbors agreed. What had begun as petty revenge quickly transformed into a community attraction. I printed information sheets about each animal and their care. Jessica, who had initially been skeptical, embraced the project and began organizing small educational sessions for the neighborhood children on weekends. Our backyard became the most popular spot in the development. Children would arrive after school to help feed the animals. Elderly residents would bring chairs and sit watching the goats play. The sense of community that had been suppressed under Karen's reign was blossoming around her worst nightmare, a mud pit with livestock. From her window, Karen watched it all, her fury growing with each passing day, but her weapons were gone. Every complaint was met with documentation of compliance. Every accusation foundered against the wall of community support we had built. She had one final card to play, the legal system, but I was more than ready for that battle. 3 weeks into our urban microfarm initiative, the certified letter arrived. Karen had filed a civil complaint in county court seeking an injunction against our livestock and unauthorized excavation, the converted pool. The complaint cited nuisance laws, health hazards, and negative impact on property values. My attorney reviewed the filing and called me immediately. "This is actually good news," he said, surprising me. "She has made specific claims that are demonstrably false. We can counter with a robust anti-SLAPP defense and add a defamation counterclaim." We prepared our response meticulously. We gathered statements from neighbors about the educational value of our setup. We obtained certification from a veterinarian regarding the health and proper care of our animals. We even had a real estate appraiser provide a statement that properly maintained urban farming features were, in fact, increasing property values in similar neighborhoods nationwide. Most importantly, we compiled a comprehensive dossier of Karen's actions over the past months: the trespassing, the false complaints, the manufactured evidence, and the pattern of targeted harassment. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I took the day off work and arrived at the courthouse in my best suit, accompanied by my attorney and 3 neighbors who had volunteered to testify if needed. Karen arrived with her own attorney, a stern-looking man with an expensive briefcase. She avoided eye contact as we waited outside the courtroom, but I could see her repeatedly checking her reflection in her compact mirror and straightening her jacket, signs of nervousness I had never observed in her before. Judge Harriet Coleman, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, called the case promptly at 9:00 a.m. Karen's attorney presented first, painting a picture of neighborhood disruption, potential health hazards, and property devaluation. He showed photographs of our backyard from various angles, carefully selected to make it look as cluttered and unappealing as possible. "Your Honor," he concluded, "this residential neighborhood is no place for agricultural activities. The defendant has essentially created a petting zoo in a suburban setting, causing distress to surrounding residents." Judge Coleman listened attentively, occasionally making notes. When it was our turn, my attorney rose calmly. "Your Honor, we have prepared a comprehensive response showing that my client's activities are not only fully compliant with all relevant regulations, but also beneficial to the community." He methodically dismantled each of Karen's claims. For the health concerns, he presented our veterinary certification and inspection reports. For the property value argument, he submitted the appraiser's analysis. For the community disruption claim, he offered statements from 15 different neighbors expressing support for our microfarm. Then came the counterattack. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have filed a counterclaim for harassment and defamation. The plaintiff has engaged in a documented pattern of targeted harassment against my client since they moved into the neighborhood." The security footage played on the courtroom monitor: Karen entering our property at night, Karen taking photographs through our windows, Karen removing items from our mailbox. Each clip was time-stamped and crystal clear. As the evidence mounted, Karen's composure crumbled. She whispered frantically to her attorney, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable. Judge Coleman removed her glasses and looked directly at Karen. "Ms. Mitchell, are you disputing the authenticity of these recordings?" Karen's attorney intervened. "Your Honor, my client admits she may have been overzealous in her HOA enforcement duties, but maintains that the current livestock situation remains inappropriate for the neighborhood." Judge Coleman was not impressed. "Overzealous enforcement does not typically involve nighttime trespassing, Mr. Larson." After a brief recess, the judge returned with her ruling. She not only dismissed Karen's complaint but also granted our counterclaim in part. "The court finds that Ms. Mitchell has engaged in a pattern of harassment that goes well beyond reasonable HOA enforcement," Judge Coleman stated firmly. "The plaintiff is hereby ordered to cease all contact with the defendants, to remain at least 100 feet from their property at all times, and to pay the defendants reasonable legal fees in this matter." She looked directly at Karen. Additionally, the court will refer this case to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal trespassing charges. Karen sat frozen, her face pale. Her attorney quickly gathered his papers, clearly eager to exit the courtroom. In the hallway afterward, my attorney shook my hand. "Congratulations, this is as decisive a victory as you could hope for." News of the court ruling spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. That evening, the HOA held an emergency session and unanimously voted to remove Karen from the board permanently. They also enacted new bylaws requiring greater transparency, due process for violations, and limits on board member authority. For Karen, the humiliation was complete. Her reign of terror had not just been challenged, it had been legally dismantled in public. Her credibility was shattered, her authority stripped away. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house. She had barely been seen outside since the court hearing, and neighbors reported moving boxes being delivered. By the end of the month, a moving truck arrived, and Karen Mitchell departed Maple Street Estates without saying goodbye to anyone. As her car pulled away for the last time, I stood at my front window, not celebrating but reflecting on how quickly power could corrupt and how important it was to stand against it. The battle had been exhausting but necessary. Sometimes justice requires more than passively following the rules, it requires actively enforcing them against those who would abuse them. "I want to thank you again," he said quietly. "For years, many of us were afraid to speak up. Karen had created this culture of fear where everyone walked on eggshells. What you did took courage." I shook my head. It was not just me, it took everyone coming together. "True," Frank nodded, "but someone had to be the first. Someone had to show it was possible to fight back. That was you." As we parted ways, his words stayed with me. Standing up to bullies is rarely easy, especially when they hide behind rules and authority. But it is necessary. Letting injustice continue unopposed only allows it to grow stronger. Today, our neighborhood is thriving. The ridiculous violation notices have been replaced with community newsletters highlighting achievements and offering genuine help. The suspicious glances have transformed into friendly waves. Children play freely without parents worrying about noise complaints. I still have all the documentation from those difficult months, every letter, every video, every legal filing. I keep them not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of what can happen when power goes unchecked, and also of what can be accomplished when people unite against abuse. If there is one lesson I learned from this entire ordeal, it is this: know the rules better than those who would use them against you. Document everything, build alliances, and never back down when you know you are right. The system may seem stacked against you, but persistence and preparation can level any playing field. As for our backyard, it remains a symbol of our victory, not because of the animals or the garden pond, but because it represents our freedom to enjoy our home without fear. That is a victory worth fighting for every single time.